The crystal award felt like a shard of ice in Alastair Finch's hand, so cold it seemed to leach the warmth from his very bones. He stood bathed in the sterile white light of the stage, a sea of black tie figures, sharks in tailored silk, applauding with a sound like distant, polite thunder. The Philanthropist of the Year award. The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. His latest philanthropic act was the imminent demolition of a dozen city blocks, a swath of urban decay to be replaced by the gleaming steel and glass phallus of the Finch Tower. He'd thrown the city a bone, a new state-of-the-art hospital wing named after him, a calculated tax write-off that bought him this meaningless accolade and the political capital to flatten a neighborhood. His speech, a masterpiece of sterile compassion written by his PR team, was loaded into the teleprompter. He opened his mouth to recite the lies, but the words never came. A ripple of confusion, a murmur, started near the side of the stage. A security guard, his face a mask of panic, was power-walking towards the podium, whispering frantically into his wrist. Then, a shadow detached itself from the heavy velvet curtains. A child. A little girl, no older than 7, with mismatched socks, a threadbare cardigan, and enormous, solemn eyes that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. She walked right up to him, oblivious to the gasps from the audience and the frantic hissing of the guards. She stopped just before his polished Italian shoes, tilted her head, and looked up into his face. A face the world knew from magazine covers, a face he barely recognized himself in the mirror anymore. "You look sad," she said, her voice clear and small, yet it sliced through the cavernous hall with the precision of a scalpel. Before he could process the sheer impossibility of her presence, she reached out a tiny, smudged hand. In her palm was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its paint worn away by time and touch. "This is for you," she whispered, "so you won't be lonely." And then the world exploded in a supernova of flashing cameras. The chaos that followed was a well-oiled machine of damage control. Security, their faces grim with failure, swarmed the stage, forming a human wall around him and the child. His personal assistant, a perpetually flustered young man named Peterson, was at his elbow, murmuring apologies and escape routes. The event's host was attempting to smooth over the unprecedented breach with forced, brittle laughter. But Alastair heard none of it. He was frozen, his gaze locked on the small wooden bird resting in his palm. It wasn't just any bird. It was a sparrow, its head cocked at a familiar, inquisitive angle, a tiny chip missing from the tip of its wing. 30 years. 30 years since he had last seen it. He had carved it himself, sitting on a sun-drenched porch, the scent of honeysuckle thick in the air. He had carved it for his daughter, Anya, on her 7th birthday. The same age as the girl now being gently but firmly escorted away. He felt the blood drain from his face. The award slipped from his other hand, shattering on the marble stage, with a sound that was deafening in the sudden, shocked silence. He didn't even flinch. His world, so meticulously constructed of concrete steel and impenetrable grief, had just been fractured by the impossible reappearance of a ghost. The little girl looked back at him over a guard's shoulder, her expression not of fear, but of profound, unsettling pity. He finally found his voice, a raw, hoarse command that cut through the hall. "Wait." The guard stopped. The murmuring ceased. Every eye in the room was on him, the titan of industry, the man who never showed a crack in his armor, now staring at a child from the slums, as if she held the secrets of the universe. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice trembling for the first time in 3 decades. The girl's eyes, the color of moss after a rain, met his. "Lily," she said simply. The name meant nothing to him, but the bird meant everything. In the silent, antiseptic calm of his penthouse, hours later, the city lights glittered below like a fallen galaxy. Alistair sat in a severe leather armchair that had cost more than the average car, the wooden sparrow resting on the polished mahogany of his desk. He had dismissed Peterson, ignored the 100-plus frantic calls from his board and his PR team. The world could burn for all he cared. His universe had shrunk to the size of this 4-inch carving. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the worn grooves. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the carving knife in his hand, the small pile of wood shavings at his feet. Anya had sat beside him, her bright, curious eyes watching his every move. "Faster, Daddy. I want to make him fly," she had chirped, her laughter like wind chimes. He had painted it blue, her favorite color, and she had named it Pip. She had taken it everywhere, a constant companion. It was in her hand the day of the accident. The police report had been clinical, brutal. A winding mountain road, a sudden rainstorm, a loss of control. His wife Elena and his daughter Anya, both gone. The report had noted that the child's personal effects were scattered and mostly unrecoverable from the ravine. He had accepted it, the way a man accepts a terminal diagnosis. He had built a fortress around the memory, brick by painful brick, until he was safe inside, untouchable. Now a 7-year-old girl named Lily had appeared with a key to that fortress and blown a hole straight through its walls. How? It was impossible. A coincidence? The world was full of coincidences, but not of this magnitude, not of this specificity. The chip on the wing. He had done that accidentally, the knife slipping just as he was finishing. Anya had been upset for a moment, then declared it was Pip's brave scar. No one could have known that detail. He had never spoken of it to another living soul. His mind, a precision instrument honed by decades of hostile takeovers and complex market analyses, began to churn. He needed data. The girl, Lily. Where did she come from? How did she get past the layers of security at the gala? More importantly, how did she get the bird? He buzzed his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Kale, a man who moved through the world with silent, lethal efficiency. "The child from the gala," Alistair said, his voice flat, betraying none of the seismic turmoil within. "I want to know everything, her name, her origins, her family, her school, her favorite color. Everything, and Kale. Be discreet." Kale's voice was a gravelly assurance on the other end. "Consider it done, Mr. Finch." The next 48 hours were a form of torture Alistair hadn't experienced since the immediate aftermath of the accident. He went through the motions of his life. He attended board meetings, his mind a million miles away, his contributions curt and dismissive. He reviewed architectural plans for the Finch Tower, staring through the blueprints as if they were glass. He ate flavorless meals served by his private chef, his palate deadened. All the while, the wooden sparrow sat on his desk, a silent, damning accusation. It accused him of forgetting, of moving on, of replacing love with ambition. He found himself talking to it, his voice a low whisper in the sterile expanse of his home. "How, Anya? How did she find this?" He would trace the carved feathers, half expecting the wood to warm with a residual memory of his daughter's touch. The world, meanwhile, was having a field day. The image of the billionaire and the orphan was on every news channel, every website, every newspaper. The headlines were a symphony of sensationalism. The Titan and the Tyke. A billionaire's mystery girl. Finch's fortress breached by a child. The narrative was spun into a feel-good story about a little girl's innocence touching a cold-hearted mogul. Pundits debated the symbolism. Columnists wrote saccharine pieces about the power of human connection. Alistair ignored it all. This wasn't a story. It was a reckoning. Cale delivered the file at dawn on the third day. It was a slim, unassuming manila folder, yet it felt heavier than gold bullion in Alistair's hands. He dismissed Cale and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rising sun setting the sky on fire. He opened the folder. Lily. No last name. Age 7. Ward of the State. Current residence, St. Jude's Orphanage, located at 12th and Elm. Alistair's blood ran cold. 12th and Elm. That was in the heart of the sector slated for demolition. The orphanage, a century-old brick building he had dismissed as an eyesore, a relic, was her home. He was about to make this child, this impossible enigma, homeless. The report was thorough. Lily had been a foundling, left on the steps of a church as an infant with nothing but a blanket and a first name. She had been in the foster system until 2 years ago, when she landed at St. Jude's. She was described as quiet, withdrawn, but unusually perceptive. Teachers noted her tendency to stare at people, as if she were looking for something. There were no known relatives, no connections, no clues to her past. The security breach had been a fluke. A caterer's van had been left unlocked for a few minutes. Lily, who had apparently wandered away from an orphanage field trip to a nearby park, had simply climbed inside, fallen asleep behind some crates, and been inadvertently driven into the secure loading bay of the gala venue. From there, she had slipped through the chaos of the kitchens and backstage corridors, a small ghost in the machine, until she found the stage. It was a 1-in-a-billion chain of events, a coincidence, but it didn't explain the bird. The folder contained a final section, interviews with the orphanage staff. He read the transcript of the conversation with the director, a woman named Mrs. Gable. She spoke of Lily with a weary affection. She's a sweet girl, but old. Her eyes are old. She doesn't play much. She just watches. And she has this little wooden box of treasures. She never lets it out of her sight. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. "Did you ask her about the wooden bird?" Cale had inquired. Mrs. Gable's response was in the report. Of course, she just said an old friend gave it to her. She wouldn't say more. She said it was a secret promise. An old friend. A secret promise. The words were frustratingly vague. But they were a thread, the first real thread he could pull. He had to see her. He had to talk to her himself. The decision was impulsive, a complete deviation from his meticulously scheduled life. He told Peterson to clear his day. No meetings, no calls. Peterson sputtered, protesting about the multi-billion-dollar merger negotiations with a Japanese tech firm. "Reschedule," Alistair said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He didn't take his usual chauffeured Maybach. He drove himself, taking a nondescript sedan from his private collection. The journey from his gleaming high-rise to the crumbling neighborhood of St. Jude's was like traveling between different worlds. The clean, wide avenues gave way to potholed streets lined with graffiti-scarred buildings and chain-link fences. Here, the Finch Tower wasn't a symbol of progress. It was a death sentence. He saw the eviction notices plastered on doors, his own name at the bottom of the sterile legal jargon. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something uncomfortable, something that might have been shame. St. Jude's Orphanage was even more dilapidated up close than it had appeared in the satellite photos. The brick was crumbling, the window frames were rotting, and a playground in the back consisted of a single rusty swing set. Yet through the grime he could hear the sound of children laughing. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 30 years, and it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He parked a block away and walked, feeling conspicuous and out of place in his bespoke suit. He entered the building, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and boiled cabbage. A weary-looking woman with kind eyes sat at a reception desk. It was Mrs. Gable. She recognized him instantly, her eyes widening in shock. "Mr. Finch, we weren't expecting you." "I'm here to see Lily," he said, his voice sounding harsh in the quiet hall. Mrs. Gable hesitated, a protective instinct flaring in her eyes. She's been through a lot. The media, the questions. She's just a little girl. I understand, Alistair said, softening his tone. I won't be long. I need to ask her about the gift she gave me. He reached into his pocket and placed the wooden sparrow on the desk. Mrs. Gable stared at it, then back at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. She's in the library, she said finally, pointing down a dimly lit corridor. She likes to look at the picture books. The library was a small, dusty room with sagging shelves and mismatched furniture. Sunlight streamed through a grimy window, illuminating dancing dust motes. Lily was sitting at a small table, a large open book in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She was just staring at a picture of a forest, her small finger tracing the outline of a tree. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She just looked up, her moss-green eyes meeting his. "Hello," she said softly. He walked over and sat in the child-sized chair opposite her, his knees practically touching his chin. He felt like a giant, an interloper in her world. He placed the sparrow on the table between them. "Hello, Lily. You gave me this." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the bird. Pip was lonely. He missed his girl. Alistair's breath hitched. Pip. She had called it Pip, a name no one, absolutely no one, could have known. "Who told you his name was Pip, Lily?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up at him, her expression serious. Anya did. The name hung in the dusty air of the library, a word that was both a prayer and a curse on Alistair's lips. He felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, the room seeming to tilt on its axis. Anya was my daughter, Lily. She's gone. She died a very long time ago." Lily's gaze didn't waver. There was no childish confusion in her eyes, only a strange, placid certainty. "She's not gone," she said, as if stating a simple fact. "She talks to me, in my dreams." Alistair stared at her, his rational mind scrambling for an explanation. The child was imaginative, fanciful. She'd overheard the name somewhere. Perhaps a news report had mentioned his daughter's name in the aftermath of the gala. But that didn't make sense. The media knew next to nothing about his private life. He had spent a fortune ensuring that. Anya's name had not been publicly mentioned in connection with him for decades. "What does she say to you, Lily?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if speaking to a fragile, frightened animal. "She tells me stories," Lily said, her eyes becoming distant, "about a house with a big garden, and a swing that went so high you could touch the clouds, and about her daddy, who could build anything in the world. She said he built her a bird so it could fly for her." Every detail was a fresh stab to Alistair's heart. The garden, the swing he had built between two old oak trees, his daughter's innocent belief in his omnipotence. These weren't public knowledge. They were intimate, buried memories. "And the bird, Lily," he pressed, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "Where did you get the bird?" "From Clara," she said. "It was in her treasure box. She gave it to me before she went to sleep with the angels." Clara. A new name. A new thread. Who was Clara? "She was old," Lily said. "She had hands like paper and she smelled like lavender. She was a nurse a long, long time ago. She lived here. She told me to keep Pip safe. She said one day the bird would find its way home. She said it was a promise." Alistair left the orphanage in a daze, the world outside seeming muted and unreal. Clara, a former nurse who had lived at St. Jude's. He drove back to his office, his mind racing. He summoned Cale immediately. "I need you to find someone. Her name is Clara. She was a nurse, elderly. She recently passed away while living at St. Jude's orphanage. I want to know her history, her full name, where she worked. any family she might have had. I want to know if she ever had any connection, however remote, to me or my family." Cale nodded, his face impassive. "And Cale," Alistair added, his voice low, "put a hold on the demolition of the 12th and Elm sector. Indefinitely." Cale's eyebrows shot up a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his surprise. "Mr. Finch, the board, the investors. The investors will be told it's a temporary delay due to unforeseen zoning complications." Alistair cut in sharply. "Handle it." For the first time in his career, Alistair Finch had made a multi-billion-dollar business decision based on the dream talk of a 7-year-old girl. He was either losing his mind or standing on the edge of a truth so profound it would shatter his entire existence. As Cale's team delved into the life of the deceased nurse, Alistair found himself drawn back to the orphanage. He told himself it was about the investigation, about getting more information from Lily. But he knew, in a part of himself he had long since walled off, that it was more than that. He was drawn to her quiet gravity, to the unsettling wisdom in her eyes. He started visiting daily, bringing gifts he thought a child might like. Elaborate dolls, expensive toys, boxes of fine chocolates. Lily would thank him politely, then set the gifts aside, seemingly uninterested. She was more fascinated by his stories. She'd ask him about building things, about the stars, about what it was like to be so tall. One afternoon, he found her in the dreary playground, sitting on the ground, meticulously arranging a line of pebbles. He sat on the edge of the rusty sandbox, feeling the unfamiliar grit of sand on his expensive trousers. "What are you building?" he asked. "A wall," she said, not looking up. "To keep the bad things out." The simple statement resonated with him so deeply, it almost knocked the wind out of him. That's what he had been doing for 30 years. Building walls. "Sometimes," he said, his voice softer than he intended, "walls keep the good things out, too." She looked up at him then, a flicker of something knowing in her gaze. "Are you a good thing, Mr. Finch?" The question, in its stark innocence, was more penetrating than any interrogation from a hostile board of directors. "I'm trying to be, Lily," he heard himself say. And the most terrifying part was that he meant it. The file on Clara arrived a week later. It was thicker than Lily's had been. Her full name was Clara May Abington, born 1935, died 3 months ago of heart failure. She had been a pediatric nurse at West Valley General for over 40 years, retiring in 2005. She had never married, had no children. After retirement, she had lived a quiet life on her nurse's pension until her health declined, at which point she had entered the long-term care wing of St. Jude's, which also served as a hospice for the indigent. Alistair scanned the employment history, his eyes searching for a connection. West Valley General. That was the hospital where Elena and Anya had been taken after the accident. The name sent a familiar chill down his spine. He read on, his pulse quickening. Cale had cross-referenced Clara's employment records with the hospital admission dates. Clara Abington had been on duty in the emergency room the night of the crash. She had been one of the nurses who attended to his family. The report included a scanned copy of the ER log from that night. He saw his wife's name, Elena Finch, DOA, and then his daughter's. Anya Finch, admitted with critical injuries. He remembered the blur of that night, the frantic drive to the hospital, the grim-faced doctor, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the crushing weight of the words that had ended his world. He had been told Anya had succumbed to her injuries a few hours after arrival, never regaining consciousness. But as he stared at the file, at the name of a nurse who had ended her days in the same orphanage as the girl who had his daughter's lost toy, a monstrous, unthinkable question began to form in his mind. He looked for Clara's signature on the official discharge papers, the ones that would have confirmed the time of death. It wasn't there. Another nurse had signed off. Clara's name was on the intake forms, but she was nowhere on the final report. It was a small discrepancy, a bureaucratic loose end perhaps. But in Alastair's new reality, there were no small discrepancies. He needed proof, something tangible. Lily had mentioned a treasure box. He called Mrs. Gable. "Lily's possessions," he said, trying to sound casual. "You mentioned a box she keeps, belongings from this woman, Clara." "That's right," Mrs. Gable said. "It's an old shoebox. Lily keeps it under her bed. She says Clara's memories are in there." An hour later, he was back in the orphanage library, the musty shoebox on the table in front of him. Lily sat opposite, watching him with her usual silent intensity. "Mrs. Gable said it was okay to show you," she said. "She said you're trying to help Clara's memories find their way home, too." With trembling hands, Alistair lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of seemingly random trinkets. A handful of seashells. A tarnished silver thimble. A book of pressed flowers. A bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. And at the bottom, nestled in a bed of yellowed cotton, was a small, leather-bound diary. He picked it up. It was old, the leather cracked with age. He opened it to a random page. The handwriting was faint, the cursive of a bygone era. It was Clara's. He started reading, and the world fell away. The diary was a record of a lonely woman's life, filled with observations about her patients, her garden, her faith. But as he flipped towards the later entries, his own name appeared and his blood turned to ice. He found the entry for the night of the accident. A terrible crash tonight. A mother and daughter. The mother gone instantly. A beautiful woman. Her husband, the industrialist Alastair Finch, is a powerful man. The little girl, Anya, is hanging on by a thread. She looks just like my sister's girl, the one we lost to fever. Those same bright eyes. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. He flipped forward a few pages, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The girl is a fighter. The doctors are amazed. But a call came down from the hospital administrator, a directive. The Finch girl is not to recover. A man came to see her. Not her father. Another man. He paid the administrator a great deal of money. He said Mr. Finch must be allowed to grieve, to move on. He said the girl would be a painful reminder, a burden. He arranged for her to be transferred to a private facility, a place from which no one returns. He is silencing her. He is stealing her from her father. Alastair felt the air leave his lungs. Another man. Not him. Who? Who would do such a thing? Who would want to inflict such a wound upon him? He read on, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the book. "I cannot do it. I cannot send this child to her death. They think she is comatose, but I see her flicker of life. Tonight, during the storm, the power went out. The backup generators failed for 3 minutes. In the chaos, I switched the charts. I found a Jane Doe, a child from a vagrant family who had passed an hour before. I put Anya's name on her chart. I declared Anya Finch deceased. I smuggled her out through the laundry chute. I have stolen Alastair Finch's daughter. God forgive me, but I did it to save her. I have taken her to a small, hidden convent upstate. They will care for her. They will give her a new name. I have told them she is my niece, an orphan. I have given them all my savings to ensure her safety. I can never go back. I have to disappear." The diary fell from Alistair's hands, landing with a soft thud on the worn carpet. He stared at the opposite wall, but he didn't see the peeling paint or the water stains. He saw a ghost with his eyes and his wife's smile. Anya. His daughter hadn't died. For 30 years he had been mourning a lie. A rage, cold and pure and absolute, rose in him, a dormant volcano suddenly erupting. Someone had taken his daughter from him. Someone had let him believe she was dead. Someone had paid to have her erased. His mind scrolled through the faces of his past, searching for the betrayer. Business rivals, enemies, people he had crushed on his way to the top. The list was long, but this felt different. This was personal. This was an act of profound, intimate cruelty. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with a worried expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Your face is all white." He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her wide, moss-green eyes, the slight dimple in her chin, the way her hair curled just behind her ears. He was seeing echoes, fragments of a face he thought was lost to memory. The face of his wife, Elena. And the eyes. The eyes were his. It hit him with the force of a physical impact, a revelation so staggering it buckled him. Anya. Clara had saved her. She had grown up, hidden away. She must have had a child she couldn't keep, a child left on the steps of a church, a child named Lily. He wasn't just looking at an orphan. He was looking at his granddaughter. The knowledge reconfigured his entire being. The grief he had carried for 30 years was not erased, but transformed. It was now alloyed with a furious, protective love for the little girl sitting in front of him, a girl who was the last living piece of his Anya. Everything else, the company, the merger, the tower, faded into insignificance. His new purpose was singular and absolute. Find the man who did this and destroy him, and protect Lily at all costs. He turned his attention back to the diary, his mind now sharp and clear. He needed more. A name. A clue. He scanned the entries from Clara's later years, the years she had spent at St. Jude's. Most were mundane, but one entry, written just a few weeks before her death, stood out. He was on the television today. After all these years, he still looks the same. Still has that same smile that never reaches his eyes. He stood next to Mr. Finch at that charity event, calling him his dearest friend. The devil knows how to wear a halo. He spoke of their long partnership, their shared vision. If only Mr. Finch knew what kind of viper he keeps in his nest. I saw him that night at the hospital. He was the one who gave the orders. I would know that face anywhere. Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne. The name was a punch to the gut. His partner. His oldest and most trusted friend. The man who had been his best man at his wedding. The man who had helped him build his empire from the ground up. The man who had held him as he wept after he'd been told his family was gone. Marcus. It couldn't be. It was too monstrous, too unthinkable. But as the initial shock subsided, 1,000 small, unsettling memories began to click into place. Marcus's strange insistence that Alastair sell the country house where he'd lived with Elena and Anya, calling it a mausoleum of memory. Marcus's subtle steering of Alastair away from any new relationships, encouraging him to pour his entire life into the company. Marcus, the constant, supportive friend, who had benefited enormously from Alastair's single-minded devotion to their shared business. And there was something else, something Alastair had buried long ago. The way Marcus used to look at Elena when he thought no one was watching. A look of intense, possessive hunger. Alastair had dismissed it as admiration for his friend's wife. Now he saw it for what it was, a sick, corrosive jealousy. The motive, terrible and simple, bloomed in his mind. Marcus hadn't wanted to hurt him. He had wanted Elena. The crash. Had it been meant for him? Had Marcus sabotaged his car, expecting him to be the one driving? He remembered that day with sickening clarity. He'd had a last-minute conference call and had told Elena to take his car, the newer, safer sedan, while he took her convertible. A simple twist of fate had saved him and condemned her. And Anya. Anya had been collateral damage, a loose end Marcus needed to tie up. He closed the diary. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't a matter for the police. Not yet. Marcus was too powerful, too well connected. He would bury any investigation in legal challenges and denials. Alistair needed irrefutable proof, and he needed to protect Lily before Marcus even knew she existed. He looked at the little girl, his granddaughter, who was now patiently trying to retie the faded ribbon around Clara's letters. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to build you the biggest, safest home you have ever seen, and no one will ever hurt you again." He left the orphanage with the diary and the letters, his mind a cold, calculating engine of vengeance. His first call was to Cale. "I have a new target. Marcus Thorne. I want 24-hour surveillance. I want his financials, his communications, his travel history for the past 30 years. I want to know every secret he has. And Cale, Marcus is not to know. He is my best friend. He must suspect nothing." His second call was to the board of directors for the Finch Corporation. He announced that he was not just delaying the Finch Tower project, he was canceling it. The land acquired in the 12th and Elm sector would be repurposed. The board was in an uproar, his investors apoplectic. He didn't care. He was tearing down his own monument. The tower had been a testament to his ambition, a symbol of his empty life. Now the land would be used for something else, something for Anya. And for Lily. Alistair moved Lily out of the orphanage immediately. He couldn't risk leaving her there, not with Marcus potentially sniffing around. He couldn't bring her to his sterile penthouse, a place with no soul and too many sharp edges. So he did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He reopened the country house, the house with the garden and the oak trees, the house he had shared with Elena and Anya. His staff had kept it maintained, a perfect preserved museum of his past life. Walking through the front door was like stepping back in time. He could almost smell Elena's perfume, hear Anya's laughter echoing in the halls. It was agony. And it was exactly what he needed. He had to face the ghosts. For Lily, it was a paradise. She explored the overgrown gardens, discovered the old tree swing, and filled the silent house with a life it hadn't known in decades. He hired the best child psychologists and tutors, but he spent most of the time with her himself. He was rediscovering a part of himself he thought was dead. He taught her how to play chess, read her stories at night, and answered her endless, insightful questions. He never told her who she was. Not yet. The truth was too heavy a burden for a 7-year-old to carry. For now, he was simply Mr. Finch, her guardian, her friend. And for now, that was enough. Meanwhile, Cale's investigation into Marcus Thorne was bearing fruit. The surveillance was a delicate dance. Marcus was cautious, intelligent, but Cale was better. He uncovered a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, and in one of those accounts he found a recurring payment, made every year for 29 years to a small, private care facility in rural Montana. A facility known for its discretion and for treating patients with untraceable histories. A place for people to disappear. It was the facility Clara had mentioned in her diary. The money trail was a dead end, laundered through a dozen different channels. But the destination was the key. He then found a record of a single, massive payment made 30 years ago to the then administrator of West Valley General Hospital. The administrator had retired to the Bahamas a week later, a very wealthy man. It was circumstantial, but it was a powerful chain of evidence. The final piece of the puzzle came from Clara's letters. They were mostly to her sister, filled with coded references to her secret ward, the little girl she was protecting from afar. In one letter, she mentioned the man who had orchestrated it all. She didn't name him, but she included a detail that made Alistair's blood run cold. "He wears a signet ring, a strange one with a coiled serpent. I saw it on his hand that night in the hospital when he gave the order. It glinted under the lights." Alistair closed his eyes. He could picture it perfectly. Marcus wore that ring every single day, It was a family heirloom, he'd always claimed. The coiled serpent. The viper in his nest. He knew he had enough to confront him. The confrontation had to be public. It had to be a place where Marcus couldn't lie his way out, couldn't call his lawyers, couldn't make a quiet exit. Alistair needed to utterly and completely destroy him in the same arena where they had built their empire, the court of public and corporate opinion. He arranged for an emergency shareholder meeting, announcing a radical new direction for the company. The bait was irresistible. The entire financial world would be watching. The meeting was held in the same grand ballroom where the gala had taken place. The symmetry was deliberate. Marcus arrived, greeting Alistair with his usual warm, back-slapping camaraderie. "Ali, my friend, canceling the tower, repurposing the land. You've got balls of steel, I'll give you that. The board is ready to string you up. What's the master plan?" Alistair looked at the man he had once considered a brother and felt nothing but a glacial calm. "You'll see, Marcus. I promise you, it will be a day to remember." Alistair took the stage, the same stage where Lily had approached him weeks earlier. The room was packed with investors, analysts, and reporters, all hungry for an explanation for his erratic behavior. He began to speak, his voice steady and clear. He talked about the company's history, about its successes. He talked about the Finch Tower, the symbol of their achievements. Then, his tone shifted. "But a company, like a man, must have a soul," he said, his eyes finding Marcus in the front row. "And for 30 years, the soul of this company and its founder has been missing. It was stolen." A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus was smiling, a confused, indulgent expression on his face, as if he were watching his friend have a quaint, philosophical breakdown. "We are all familiar with the story of my family's tragedy," Alistair continued, his voice dropping slightly. "A car accident, a wife and daughter lost. But today, I'm here to tell you that was a lie." The room fell silent. Marcus's smile faltered. "My daughter, Anya, did not die in that crash." He let the words hang in the air, a collective gasp rippling through the audience. "She was stolen from me. She was hidden away. And I was allowed to believe she was dead thanks to the actions of a man I trusted. A man who wanted my wife, and when he couldn't have her, settled for my company and my life. A man who paid a hospital administrator to falsify death records. A man who condemned a 7-year-old girl to a life without a father, a life without her own name." He paused, and his gaze locked onto Marcus Thorne. He held up a small, remote-controlled projector. "A man who wears a very distinctive ring." On the massive screen behind him, a high-resolution image flashed into view. It was a still from the hospital's security footage from that night, painstakingly recovered and restored by Cale's team. The image was grainy, but the figures were clear enough. A younger Marcus Thorne speaking to the hospital administrator, and on his hand, glinting in the harsh fluorescent light, was the signet ring with the coiled serpent. Marcus Thorne's face went ashen. He half rose from his seat, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "This is insane," he stammered. "Alistair, you're not well. This is libel." "And then there's the money, Marcus," Alistair said, his voice like ice. The screen changed, showing a complex flowchart of bank transfers leading from Marcus's hidden accounts to the hospital administrator and the Montana facility. And the sworn, notarized deathbed confession of a nurse named Clara Abington. He held up a copy of the diary entry. Panic was blooming in Marcus's eyes. He looked around for an escape, but the doors were being quietly blocked by Cale's men, who now looked a lot less like corporate security and a lot more like what they were. The press was in a frenzy, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Alistair raised a hand for silence. "My daughter Anya grew up hidden from the world. She lived a short, difficult life, and she passed away a few years ago. But she left behind a gift, a legacy, a daughter of her own. The side doors of the ballroom opened. Mrs. Gable walked in, holding Lily's hand. Lily was dressed in a simple, clean dress, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She looked scared, but when she saw Alastair on the stage, her expression softened. He walked to the edge of the stage and knelt down, holding out his hand. "It's okay," he said, his voice filled with a warmth no one in that room had ever heard from him. Lily let go of Mrs. Gable's hand and walked to him. He lifted her up into his arms, and she buried her face in his shoulder. He stood up, turning to face the shocked audience, the cameras, and the ruined man in the front row. "This is Lily," he announced, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "She is my granddaughter, and she is the future of this company. The land at 12th and Elm will not be the site of the Finch Tower. It will be the site of the Anya and Lily Foundation, a campus dedicated to providing housing, education, and health care for every orphan and at-risk child in this city. St. Jude's will not be torn down. It will be the cornerstone of that foundation. My entire fortune, my entire company, is now pledged to this single purpose, to ensure that no child is ever lost, stolen, or forgotten again." He looked directly at Marcus, whose face had collapsed into a mask of pure hatred and defeat. "As for my former partner," Alistair said, his voice cold and final, "I'm sure the authorities who are waiting outside will have some questions for him." The world was, as the old saying went, shocked. The story was more dramatic, more unbelievable than any fiction. The fall of Marcus Thorne was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested on the spot, and the subsequent trial was a media circus that laid bare his decades of deception. But the real story, the one that captured the world's heart, was not about the villain's fall, but about the hero's redemption. The image of Alastair Finch, the ruthless corporate raider standing on that stage with his lost granddaughter in his arms, became iconic. He had been a man who built towers of steel and glass. Now he was building a legacy of hope. He poured himself into the foundation with the same ferocious intensity he had once reserved for hostile takeovers. He was on site every day, overseeing the construction, talking to the architects, but also talking to the children who would soon call the campus home. He was no longer just Mr. Finch, the billionaire. He was Alastair, the man who read stories in the new library, the man who pushed kids on the new swings, the man who knew each of their names. He and Lily lived in the country house, the ghosts of the past now gentle, comforting presence. He told her the whole story, bit by bit, as she was old enough to understand. He told her about her grandmother, Elena, and about her mother, Anya, the brave girl who had survived so much. He showed her pictures and told her stories, weaving the family back together across the chasm of time and lies. One evening, years later, they were sitting on the porch, the same porch where he had carved the wooden sparrow. Lily, now a bright, confident teenager, was sketching in a notebook. Alistair was watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. "You don't look sad anymore, Grandpa," Lily said, not looking up from her drawing. Alistair smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden bird. He had carried it with him every single day. He turned it over in his palm, the wood warm from his touch. "No, I don't," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Pip, you found your way home. You showed me the way, too." The little wooden bird, a simple gift from a little girl, hadn't just brought a man his granddaughter. It had brought him back to himself. It had torn down his fortress of grief and rebuilt a home in its place. A home filled with laughter, with hope, and with a love that had, against all odds, endured. The world had been shocked by the gift. But Alistair Finch knew the truth. He had been saved by it.